and then we will get into the actual training content. Okay. So can you all see my screen? Can anyone confirm if you're able to see my screen?
Yes, yes, Srinivas.
Yes,
Okay.
we can see.
Yeah. So yeah. So my name is Dixon. So I'll be your trainer. So I'm working as a technical lead and FHIR, HL7 and Mirth Connect trainer from past 7-8 years. So I'm in this integration space for more than 14 years now. So I worked on various HL7 interfaces for various standards like CCDs, FHIR, IHE, HL7 V2, very little on V3. Worked on insurance standards as well, like X12, and a little bit on DICOM. And I worked using various integration engines like Rhapsody, Mirth Connect, Integration Buddy, Ensemble, Connector, and also a couple of others like Cuvera and Iguana. I've been training resources for the past 7 years, as I said, specifically online. And we are also providing corporate trainings where we train companies, uh, specifically on HL7, FHIR, and Mirth Connect. So let's quickly jump through the course content so that you guys can get an idea on what would be our journey, what topics we are going to cover as part of FHIR, and then we'll jump into the actual content. So we'll be starting with FHIR. We'll take a look at the basics. We'll start at basics because there will be people who may not be from FHIR background or healthcare background. So we'll begin with hospital workflow to understand where exactly things get started. And we will talk about purpose of FHIR in the hospital workflow or in the hospital scenario. Why do we need FHIR? And how FHIR is actually solving a use case or the problem statement that we have in real time. So we'll take a look at that. What is a problem? How do we solve it using FHIR? And we'll talk about what is the where do we look at standards and for FHIR. We'll take a look at the documentation. Where do we see if we need anything on FHIR? Where exactly we refer to? And then we will talk about patient resource structure. We'll take a look at what is a patient resource, what are the elements that we have as part of patient resource, and what is the exchange format that we use. Specifically to talk about FHIR can be exchanged in 3 different formats, but our entire training will be focusing mainly on JSON format. That is what we'll be using. So we'll talk about what is the format, how do we structure a JSON message, how do we read a JSON message, the basic stuff of what is the format and all. And then we'll jump into the next session, where we'll take an in-depth review or in-depth view of what is a patient resource. So we'll take a look at each property of a patient resource of each of those elements that we have. We'll take a look at what is cardinality, what is the importance of data types. We'll review the common data types that we may come across for the future resources that we are going to take a look at. So first we'll start with patient, but in the future sessions, we are going to take a look at other resources as well. So understanding few of the data types is necessary so that we don't halt with a certain data element structure or resource structure. Then we will jump into description of a little bit about descriptions. What are table codes that we have? We'll talk about 2 data types, specifically code and codable concepts, how they represent data in terms of codes. So we'll try to understand that for few of the elements by taking few examples from the patient resource itself. Then once we understand the structure, by this time we'll be able to read any resource, basically, starting with patient resource, and understand what is the structure of that particular resource. But apart from that, there are a couple of things that we need to understand about ancestor resources, which are called as base resource and domain resource. So most of the resources within FHIR will have these 2 elements referenced. And there will be few data elements from these 2 resources, which will be used in the current standard resource. So we'll talk about what are those important data elements like resource identity and the other elements involved as part of base resource. We'll also talk about narrative and discrete sections, which are part of domain resource. So we'll take a look at all the elements that are there as part of base resource and domain resource and how they are used as a common element or common elements in most of the resources that we have. Then we will take a look at how do we construct a resource using the schema that we have. So we'll create a patient resource using VS Code. We'll import the schematron that we have from FHIR for R4 version, and we'll start creating a resource in VS Code, which will take the schema as the reference and will tell us if we are making any mistakes on the fly. And then we'll start searching for resources. So we'll use that particular resource that we have created and create a sample patient record using FHIR. FHIR is the destination FHIR server that we'll be using for our training. So we'll post a patient resource, create a patient resource, and see how that gets created after creating the patient, after constructing a patient resource using VS Code. Then after creating a resource, we'll definitely be taking a look at how to search for a patient. So we'll see the very basic form of how do you search for records. And then we'll talk about FHIR maturity levels. So by this time, we will get a fair idea of how to read a patient resource, how to construct it, and how to post it to a FHIR resource, which is a complete cycle of what do we do with one single resource. And then we'll talk about FHIR maturity levels so that we know how a particular resource gets matured, how a particular resource takes birth, which is nothing but first gets created, and then how it grows or how it matures. So there is something called as FHIR maturity model, FMM. So we'll take a look at that maturity model. After that, the second vertical when we talk about FHIR is nothing but understanding the API, REST API architecture. So understanding the data format is one side of FHIR, and the other side is nothing but how do we transact that information? How do we move the information from one system to another? So that's where REST will come into play. So we'll talk about what is REST API architecture. We'll talk about client server architecture, what is REST. We'll see how REST API interactions work, what is the basic REST principles, and we'll talk about FHIR laid down URL structure for transacting data between two different systems. So we'll see what is an API, what are in the FHIR level interactions that we have. We'll talk about instance level interaction, type level interaction, whole system level interactions. And then we'll talk about searches based on these interactions. After that, as we are, by the time we'll be aware of both the sides of FHIR, both the how you exchange the data and what format you exchange the data for certain resource. Then we can go ahead and take a look at all of these resources. We'll talk these resources from workflow perspective. So we'll see how appointments are created, what are the resources that are involved in an appointment, how patient orders are managed, orders and results are managed, and what are the resources involved in that. So as part of that, we'll take a look at practitioner, organization, appointment, encounter resource. Surveys and observation are basically used, and diagnostic report are basically used in an order result scenario situation. Then we will talk about other few resources like medication request. And once we do that, there is something called concept called as resource lifecycle, where we have few resources where resource lifecycle can be tracked with the help of an element called status. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And once we complete that, we'll talk about few specialized resources that we have. I call them as special resources. So we'll talk about bundle resource. What is the usage of bundle? How do we use it real time? How we can post multiple records to FHIR? How we can perform a batch transaction with FHIR server. So we'll talk about that. Then we'll talk about contained resources. We'll talk about advanced search parameters. So every resource comes in with a basic search criteria or basic search parameter. But in case if you want to pull out multiple resources from the database, we have the concept of advanced search. So we'll take a look at what are the advanced search items that we have. Specifically, we will dive into examples with include and rev include to include multiple resources in our search result. Let's say I want to search for patient and all the encounters associated with that patient. How do I do that? Or if I want to go ahead and create a call out for an encounter and include all the resources that are referencing to that encounter. How do I do that? So we'll talk about these two specifically to have primary level, secondary level, and tertiary level inclusions as well when we want to go ahead and perform an additional search. So we'll take a look at advanced search that way. Then we will talk about extensibility, which is nothing but extending the current resource. How do you add new elements to the base structure that we have in FHIR? So FHIR comes with the basic structure for each of these resources. Let's say patient, if you see patient record, you will not have race, ethnicity, and all in the base structure that you see. If you want to add new elements, you can add it. How do you add it? Using extension concepts. So we'll talk about extensions. Then we will talk about, then we will see, take a common industry use case, which is to convert an HL7 V2 version or a CSV message into FHIR resource. So we'll be using Mirth Connect for that. Mirth Connect is industry standard integration engine, which can be used for this kind of transactions. If not Mirth, you can use any other integration engine as well. But for our training, we'll be using Mirth Connect to convert the data. So as part of that, we'll talk about the tool. We'll take a look at JavaScript E4X as part of this tool. And we'll write the code to transact a V2 message to FHIR resource. And then we'll talk about security protocols. We'll see how do you, what all security protocols FHIR suggests. As such, FHIR doesn't say that you have to strictly follow this. They just suggest that you follow the regular web standards that we have. So we'll take a look at how do we protect the data through HTTPS using SSL certificates and two-way authentication and all. And specifically, we'll take a deep dive into OR2 functionality. How do you, and the workflow with respect to OR2. What is OR2? Why do we use it? What are the entities or players that are or actors that will be used in OR2? How do you get a token? How do you transact it? What is the importance of it and all? We'll take a look at during OR2. And then Smart on FHIR, which is a concept built on OR2. We'll take a look at what are the concepts of as part of Smart on FHIR. So this is Smart on FHIR is pretty much used as standard in today's world. It started with the concept in back in 2010 when FHIR started. But yeah, now in today's transactions, today's all the implementations, we see that Smart on FHIR concept is used as a standard, and even FHIR recommends that. So we'll take a look at Smart on FHIR, how I can use those concepts and incorporate that in real-time use cases. And after that, we'll talk about conformance and profiling. So conformance and profiling is nothing but how do you manage your FHIR resources? What is profiling? Which is nothing but how do you create your own resource structure from the base resource that is provided by FHIR. So as part of that, we'll be taking a look at all of these topics. What is capability statement? What is structure definition? What is implementation guide? And then finally, we'll take a look at how do you interpret flags and icons. And we'll talk a little bit about licensing. Then there will be a last topic, which is terminology. So terminology is one of the main important aspects of FHIR. When we want to validate the data on the server side, then FHIR terminology plays one of the major role. So terminology is a different and separate module altogether in FHIR. So we'll talk about what are the operations that we have as part of terminology, what are the resources that are involved in terminology, what are the data types that are involved in terminology. So we'll take a deep dive into that, and we'll see how terminology services are used from different servers like onto server and all. Okay, and in the last session, by this time, we'll be completing most of the things that we needed for certification material as well. 70 to 80% of that material will also be covered as part of the above sessions. So, but we will take a quick overview on what topics we need to cover, what is the weightage for each of those individual topics. We'll take a look at few sample questions. As in when we are going through the training, there will be few quizzes and polls during the training, during each of these sessions, uh, where you can answer them so that you can understand what format of questions might come up. So we'll have that exercise as well. So that would be the entire course content. Any questions from anyone before we jump on to the actual session?
Hi, Jason.
Hey, Farman. Hi,
Hey,
how are you?
good, good. So one question, you mentioned that we'll be using Mirth Connect, right?
Right,
So
right.
remember when we were doing the HL7, you mentioned that the fire will be available. So do we have to use an extension, anything?
No, we are not going to use any extension. FHIR has their own, I mean, Mirth has its own FHIR related extensions, but we are going to use the freeware. Extensions are provided to the licensed version of FHIR, licensed version of Mirth Connect. We will not be using that. We'll be using our JavaScript itself to create those objects. So we won't be relying on that.
Oh, okay, thank you.
All right. So let us go ahead and get started. So if you guys have any questions, you guys can ask tomorrow as well. But no, we'll get started with today's session. So by the end of today's session, we'll be taking a look at the basic stuff. What is FHIR? Where do we use it? How did we get the name? What is the importance of each of these terms in that acronym? And a little bit about FHIR history. And we'll also talk about patient resource and JSON structure. And we will conclude the session. So let's get to the basics. We usually I cover the hospital workflow as the basic both for HL7 and FHIR. A reason is this is where all gets started. This is where we gather the data, and data is the core of all of these standards. Whether we talk about V2, whether we talk about CCD, or whether we talk about FHIR, and this will help us to understand where exactly we have what kind of problem and how our standards are solving these problems. So we all know this basic stuff. If you are into FHIR, then I'm pretty sure you're already into healthcare a little bit, but we'll quickly go through this workflow. So when patient visits the hospital, he will go to the front desk and gets himself registered, and apparently they will go ahead and provide their information, and data is captured in the front end system. As soon as that data is captured, this data will flow over to the EHR, which is nothing but the software which is used by the doctors. And once the demographic information is captured, then an appointment is scheduled for the patient. This appointment information will also flow over from the receptionist software system to the software system that is present at doctor's desk. And after that, we see that patient will meet the doctor, and this situation where patient meets the doctor is called as an encounter, and they will discuss about the problem. If doctor is able to resolve the problem just by looking at the patient, that's fine. If not, in most of the cases, we see that doctor will place an order, right? And that order information will flow over from EHR system to the lab system. Lab will go ahead and send the results back to the doctor's desk or doctor software system, and there they will go ahead and review the results and prescribe the treatment to the patient. And then finally, all the charges related to the patient will be sent over to the receptionist desk. Receptionist will go ahead and clear the uh, charges and all, generate a claim and send it to the EHR, send it to the insurance companies for the claim remittances. Right, that's where the life cycle of the patient concludes. But in all of these scenario, we see that EHR, let's say that EHR or HIS system, which is the central core, will hold all the information. It will have demographic data, it will have appointment data, diagnosis info, lab info, pharmacy info, and all. Right, receptionist will send the data, and usually these transactions are or events are transacted to EHR with the help of HL7 messaging. And then provider will also send data and receive data based on HL7 transactions itself. And then we have lab, which also transact. When I say HL7, I'm talking about V2 or CCD transactions that might happen. Okay, and then we have pharmacy related information that is exchanged with pharmacies as ERX. Now, in all of these scenarios, data is residing at the hospital. Patient from outside, unfortunately, doesn't have access to his own information, right? There are a few solutions like patient portal and all, but those are not uh, complete full-fledged solutions where patient can view his entire information. Apparently, at the end of the day, patient is the one who should have access to his info, but there is no proper solution back then. We are talking about the problem when we had back then in 2010, around 2010, and patient couldn't access his information at all. So that's where FHIR has come into play to solve this problem. This is one of the solutions. This is not the only solution why FHIR has been implemented or FHIR has been drafted as a standard. This is one of the main problem statements and problem solutions that we had with FHIR. So we saw in the previous slide that data is being saved in EHR database. So FHIR solves it by adding a layer on top of that particular existing data. So what happens? FHIR will sit on the as an additional layer on EHRDB and will help us to exchange that information with external devices like mobile information, mobile or any desktop related applications. So apparently it is exposing the data that is already there within the hospital to the outside world. So whoever wants to create mobile apps can use that additional layer, which is laid down using FHIR. And as it is exposing the data to the outside world, these mobile apps can integrate with EHR, being FHIR the middleware, and exchange the data, send the request, get the patient information, and take a look at that patient information in the mobile app. Similarly, same is the case with desktop apps or any other apps that you create in any external device. Okay. Let's say that we have a Fitbit, for example, and we using Fitbit, we capture a lot of information, right? If you want to post that information to our doctor, that also can be done through FHIR. It's another thing whether EHR is allowed to do so or not, whether they are allowed to post the data or not. But yeah, that is one possibility, one use case that we can have in real time, where you say that you send your real time data to the EHR system so that you can have track of your health information, right? So that kind of exchanges are also enabled with the help of FHIR or by adding this layer. So this is one solution where FHIR can solve one of the greatest problems that we have, which is to engage the patient with his own data or his own information. Now you may see another solution in real time, like having a dedicated FHIR repository. Now, this is the case where hospitals don't want to expose or add a layer on top of their EHR systems. Now, in the previous slide, we saw that uh, hospitals may add an added layer on their existing database, but few hospitals don't prefer doing that. There are many infrastructure reasons behind it, security reasons behind it, why they don't want to do it. So in such cases, what they do is they convert their entire EHR data into a FHIR repository database where you don't interact with, I mean, you don't have this layer added on top of EHR, but the entire data is converted into a FHIR resource repository, as you can see in this slide. And then you will have the entire FHIR server created, and you will exchange your data or exchange patient information using that FHIR server. So this is called as dedicated FHIR repository solution. Earlier one that we have seen is called as FHIR facade layer, because we are adding a facade to the existing database and we are exchanging or exposing the internal data. Now, in this case, in the second case, this is called as a repository solution. Depending on the requirement, business requirement or business solutions, every hospital might go for any one of these. It purely depends on how they want to go ahead and proceed. All right. So what is FHIR? So FHIR stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. As we can see, basically it started back in 2010. Um, it solves the problem of the earlier versions that we had. We talk about V2, V3, and CDA. They had their own problems. All of those problems are fixed or improved in FHIR. So FHIR basically uses RESTful technology, RESTful web services as its core. So in order to exchange the data between two different systems, we'll use this RESTful architecture. And the data format that we are going to use is JSON, XML, or Turtle, right? If you want to exchange the data between two different systems, there should be a specific format that we have to use. In today's world, most of the systems use JSON and XML. So Turtle is new for me as well, but there are very few people who use Turtle, but you have that option as well if you want to. So FHIR consists of resources. So these are called as basic building blocks of our FHIR specification, because resources form the base structure or basic unit of FHIR specification. Entire healthcare data can be transacted with the help of these resources. This small unit of exchange is called resources. So let's quickly take a look at why and how FHIR got started and what is the history of the versions of HL7 that we have. So FHIR is a standard that is managed by HL7. Uh, so yeah, we have a question. I'll take a look at the questions in the chat once we complete today's session. So please, I request you to hold on. So we'll take a look at evolution of HL7 standards. So back then in 1997, we had the initial standard released, which is called as version 2.3. 2.3 was a massive hit because of its ease of implementation and the problems that it was solving at that point in time. And then after that, in 2003, we had version 2.5 released. So there were few corrections and improvements for existing version 2.3. There were few additions and removals to include certain things that are needed at that point of time in 2003. And after that, we had one major release called as version 3. So version 3 was, there was a lot of discussion talking about version 3 when it got released back in 2005. Because version 3 was complete reformatting of the data of what we had, or deformatting of the structure that we had for V2. Okay, V2 was totally different, V3 was totally different. And V3 was not very much welcomed by the industry. There are a couple of reasons for that. Number one, first reason is because of its complexity. It was not as easy as V2. So people did not find the competency in the market at that point of time to implement more of V3 interfaces. And another thing is value addition. So V3 was not adding any significant value when compared to V2. V2 was has solved a lot of industry related problems at that point of time. But moving from V2 to V3, it was pretty much same thing that you're doing. It's just that you are reinventing the wheel and moving from one interface to another interface. Significantly, there is no business value addition. Technically, there may be more valuable aspects, but from business solution perspective, it's just that you are exchanging the order. It's the same thing in V3. Nothing has changed much. But V3 has also released a standard called CDA, which is Clinical Document Architecture, to exchange document. This was a massive hit. CCDs were used a lot, and even today, for all the HIE exchanges, we use CCD as the common standard. So, which is this CDA is released as part of CCD, and that was huge successful. Then we have FHIR R3, which FHIR started in 2010. Apparently, Graham Grieve, who is known as father of FHIR, has started working on FHIR, and it was released as a standard in 2010. They saw that there is a need for new standard which can incorporate the latest technologies that we have. As I said, till 2010, till FHIR was introduced, there was no proper solution or a standard solution which would say that we can exchange the data, hospital data, to the outside world. V2, V3, CDS, all of these standards were introduced or were invented to go ahead and solve the problems for exchanges between the hospitals or within the hospital or within the medical entities only. But there was no standard that would satisfy the need of exchanging the data with outside world, exposing the data to the outside world. So that was solved with FHIR. FHIR started in 2010. It was slowly improving. Uh, there were a lot of people who were involved in improving the FHIR as a standard, and it was used. It was an STU, which is standard for trial use till 2016, and after that we had a F3 FHIR R3 release, and in 2019 FHIR R4 was released. So FHIR R4 is one of the mostly used standard today because of its maturity when we compare to the older versions, obviously. And we are hearing about FHIR in last 2 3 years a lot, right? That is because R4 is pretty much standard kind of thing. And especially with COVID and all, how do you exchange the data between hospitals and outside patient related apps and all has been come into light a lot. So that's the reason we are seeing that FHIR is being used a lot and talked about a lot in last couple of years. So next version is R5. R5 is around the corner. So I'm not very sure when it will be released, but we'll definitely have a new release for R5. As per FHIR rules and standards, for every 2 years, there is supposed to be a new standard that will be released. But with R5, there is a lot of discussion going on whether we have to release it as a trial use or whether we have to release it as a standard version. So I'm not sure where we stand with that, but we can expect a new release with R5 soon. So why do we need FHIR? So as I said earlier, we already briefed about this problem. So HL7 organization basically manages the interoperability standards for healthcare. You talk about V2, V3, CDA, and FHIR. All of these are managed by HL7 organization itself. So in 2010, we have realized that basically the industry entirely realized that there is a need for new format of data exchange or new standard to exchange the data for the real-time uh, data exchanges and the ever-growing requirement that we have for exchanging the data between different systems or different entities using the latest technologies. So there is vast increase in amount of data that we are capturing or gathering in real time, and existing standards were obviously lacking the solutions to solve the problem that we had at that point of time. And then FHIR looked appealing because of the way it has been designed. It uses the latest web technologies like REST API and latest web data formats like JSON, XML, and all to exchange the data between different entities. So it also combines best features that we had from V2, V3, and CDA. So there are many concepts within FHIR which we borrowed from the earlier versions. So as we usually say, good things are taken, bad things are removed. So in the same way, good things are taken from all the versions. For example, if you talk about the Z segments or extensions in FHIR, this is the concept borrowed from V2, where we create customized Z segments. Similarly, from V3, we took the concepts of using codes and tables and all. So there are many things that we borrowed from older versions and incorporated them in FHIR. You will see a lot of relativity between the older versions and the new FHIR versions as we progress through the course. So FHIR comes in 4 flavors. We call it as 4 paradigms of FHIR. So when you talk about FHIR, basically REST API is at the core. So this is the most basic exchange mechanism that we use. Apart from that, we also have CDA documents. So FHIR also has the architecture to replace the existing standard of CDA. We can go ahead and exchange the documents with the help of CDA, with the help of documents standard that we have for FHIR. Then we have next one is messaging paradigm. So using messaging paradigm, basically, if you want to exchange data transactions using V2, V3 and replace them, you can also do that with FHIR messaging V2, V3. And the last one we have is services. We can exchange the data with the help of services. Right now, the entire focus is on REST APIs. Parallelly, there is little development on documents and little development on messaging as well. but the primary focus for the entire community is to go ahead and develop all the resources and bring them to the final maturity as soon as we can. So before we jump into the resource, what is resource structure and all, any questions from anyone based on what we have seen so far?
Please elaborate a little more on the two ways the FHIR is exposed, right? One where you mentioned that like all the data is extracted into a data source, and FHIR will be like FHIR API is exposed at the data source. That I understood as like, does that mean like data is stale, where like it's at least there is some lag? You push the data from main server to this server, so that like nobody is directly accessing the data from the main data server. Is that what the difference between the two approaches?
Yes, we are anyways going to take a look at that in future. But yeah, as you said, there are infrastructure reasons as well as data security reasons why people want to go ahead and create a separate FHIR repository. That is one thing. Second thing is, especially payers who are there in the industry, they want to, they don't exchange the data with the patient. Patient doesn't have any connection with the payers at all in terms of their health data or clinical data. So payers are another players in the industry who create a FHIR repository. So infrastructure reasons are like, if the server is on premise where the EHR is being or EHR is in the premises of the hospital, all the IT is maintained by their own staff. They don't want to go ahead and exchange the data and have others peeking into their infrastructure, so that they will go with some cloud solution and create a FHIR repository and have that data on cloud and exchange the data with other external entities. So these are a couple of infrastructure and security reasons why they go with that approach.
So are you saying that, Dixon, are you saying that the data exposed will be limited amount of, just the necessary amount of data, right? Not
That depends on the business use case again. Now, whether you want to convert the entire FHIR repo that you have, EHR data that you have into FHIR repository, or only parts of the data, that is purely a business decision. But apparently they don't give access to their EHR database directly, but create a separate source of data altogether and then provide the access to that source, which is FHIR repository. There are situations where you build a real-time integration between EHR and FHIR repositories so that data will be in sync between these two systems as well.
okay. I have one quick question about the workflows. So I'm just comparing the standards between HL7 and FHIR. So HL7, as you know, is a trigger based, message standard.
Right.
How does FHIR handle the workflows within the hospital organizations? So when it comes to HL7, you are registering a patient, updating a patient, placing an order. Those are all triggering events which would generate the HL7 transactions. And in the scenario of FHIR, but let's say if we have EMR and lab integration in FHIR, and a lab order is being placed, will that considered a triggering event, and then FHIR will handle that triggering event? Or
yes, kind of. So I did show you in the previous slide, right, where we talked about messaging as a paradigm where you can exchange or replace HL7 V2 related events or V3 related events using FHIR. So FHIR will operate very similar to what we do in V2, like a trigger event happens and a service gets invoked, and then you send the data to the destination system. something like that. So when we talk about workflows and all, we'll get deeper into, for example, we'll take a scenario of appointment workflow, what all resources are involved and how do we invoke them, which will somewhere represent how do we do things in V2. So we'll take a deeper look at that point of time for sure.
Okay.
Hey, Dixon, this is Vikesh. Quick question.
Yeah, Vikash.
Um, how do you control the data when it comes to the FHIR? So, in the both both the approaches, one approach directly connecting to the EHR database. EHR database has different kind of information,
Right.
personal information, clinical information, all those kind of things.
Right.
You can't expose the same information to everything. So, how do you control that information? And for the second approach, also, if you are taking a FHIR database, again, the same concept. And I'm putting all my questions in one shot itself. And the second is when you say, read only makes more sense, but when you say that user can also post the data to the database, how that system works, what are the authentication and which comes into the picture when user is trying to put data into the either direct database or the FHIR database.
Okay. All right. So yeah, those can be answered in a very larger thing, but I'll try to put them in very short aspects to be precise. So one, how do you control it? So when you talk about REST API and all, hospitals can decide what all data sections can be exposed to the outside world. Based on that, the REST APIs that we develop will have something called as scope associated with them. So when, let's say, there are two different users, okay, or there are two different entities who are trying to interact with a hospital and get the data. So entity 1 and entity 2, entity 1 is granted access only to look at payer data within the hospital. Entity 2 is granted access only to look at the clinical data within the hospital. So this is controlled based on entity wise and the scope that they are assigned with. So when you transact something called as when you transact the data, or when you interact with when that entity interacts with the FHIR repository, using the OR2 workflow, there is one parameter called a scope. That scope will determine what all you have access to. And using that, you can control whether you can give access to all the resources or certain section of resources. How do you want to manage it, and all can be managed there. So that's how you control the data. Now, first phase is for hospital to decide what all data has to be exposed. Second phase is to decide on entity to entity basis that this entity can have access to only these set of resources. This entity can have access to only these set of resources. So that is how it is controlled and managed. Second thing is about posting the data back. As of now, I just gave that as an example to say the possibility of what all we can do. But in real time, usually posting of data back from a certain entity or certain system to the EHR directly obviously is not supported. But there are few solutions out there like Smile CDR and other FHIR repositories which are planning to do so that patient-related health analytics can also be projected and some sort of predictive analysis can be done. But I am not very sure to what extent it is being used in real time in today's world.
Yeah,
but
and
certainly we have future projections for that.
Yeah, in the US, there was a product called Hollow from Amazon, and that was tightly integrated with Cerner EMR.
Okay.
I haven't used that, but I heard about that. That can directly integrate with your Cerner, and you can post the real-time data to the Cerners. But I always have, had question, how that works, because if that's so easy, then everyone will be putting the data, and then what's going to happen to the database? How much data?
Obviously, I think the data that comes from outside, definitely there will be a different architecture to manage it, to segregate it from the existing information that we have in EHR. No one will go ahead and give the that flexibility, or you can say that just get some data, outside data integrated with EHR or the internal systems. Definitely there will be a better architecture. If I am the one who does that, then I would definitely think of a lot of things before allowing someone to get the data into my system. So yeah, there will definitely be a better thought around it. But yeah, as I said, I was explaining the scope of what FHIR can do. So it can help us in exchanging readable data and also importing the data into systems if required, which was never a thought case in cases of earlier versions that
Yep.
we had.
Yep. Makes sense. Thank you.
Right, no problem.
Dixon, I have a question.
Hey, Kiran. Yeah.
Hi. Um, so can FHIR can be used as an like in between the products, like as we are using HL7 message from the RIS system to a PAX interface as an interface. So can we use that as a can we use FHIR as well in that case, in that
You
scenario?
can.
Okay.
So that is one of the paradigm. As I said just now, FHIR has plans to replace V2 and V3, but that cannot happen in the near future. There are a lot of reasons behind it because right now FHIR is still evolving. There are a lot of resources which are maturing, which are not in a mature state.
Yes.
When we talk about maturity model, we'll understand where we stand with FHIR. There are only handful of resources out of 100% of resources that we have. Only 10 to 12% of resources are completely matured, which means they don't change the structure. Other alls tend to change the structure. So if we use those now, right now, in future, we will have to go ahead and change it again frequently. So we are yet to reach at a point where we say that, yes, this is a standard structure that we have where we may not change. That's when people will tend to go ahead and replace in case if it is adding more value. Again, there are a lot of other verticals that will come into play on why we are replacing V2. If it is doing the same thing of what V2 is already doing and not adding significant value, I don't see people moving from V2 to FHIR. But new implementations, brand new implementations may go directly with FHIR instead of going with V2. So V2 and FHIR will coexist for a very long time, at least for next 5 to 7 years is what I see.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Jay.
Dixon,
Yeah.
besides the use case that you mentioned, that you explained, what could be other use cases specifically, within a healthcare provider setting? So,
Specific use case in the sense, I'm sorry, I did not get your question.
so you mentioned about exchanging the information between, let's say, between patient and the hospital, or maybe between two hospital organizations. Are there any use cases applied? Can be FHIR can satisfy within the hospital environment?
See, as of now, within the hospital, we'll still go with V2 only, not FHIR. Specifically, when we talk about external exchanges, that is when people prefer to go with FHIR because there is no other go. V2 is an established solution, right? So people prefer to go with V2 itself. Now, in well-developed countries who are moving to digital healthcare now, V2 itself, because now not only the new standard, not only all about new standard, but also how easily, how quickly, how soon you can implement an interface, right? So people still tend to go with V2 within hospital implementations because that is faster, quicker. We have a lot of resources out there available who can do it quickly when compared to FHIR. So that is a go-to solution as of now. Let's see if it changes in the future. But FHIR for external exchanges, it is used a lot. So whoever is implementing, exposing their existing data, they will go ahead and use FHIR. And FHIR is more of a data model than an event model. V2 is purely based on event, as you mentioned. It is purely an event-driven messaging methodology, whereas FHIR is a data-driven methodology. You have the data segregated or chunked into units of data and can be exchanged with external entities.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
Hi, Dixon.
Hey, Sifat. Hi.
Yeah. Hi. I want to know about that, about the cost of implementation of FHIR. Like, is it feasible for every organization that they can opt for the FHIR in terms of expenses?
So when you say implementation of FHIR, it is a very broad category. When we talk about FHIR implementation, there are several flavors that comes into play. Whether you are planning to implement a server, or whether you are planning to implement a or create a mobile app, that is one side of it, and or whether you are planning to implement a middle layer, be a middleware to convert the legacy standards like V2, CSV, V3 into FHIR and then be a middle layer. So there are several use case implementations that we can talk about. Each of them will differ. Now, how affordable it is? Obviously, FHIR is using the latest web standards that we have, like REST APIs and data formats. So the skill is niche. Reason being, it needs functional knowledge about very detailed functional knowledge about healthcare, and also at the same time you need very good IT knowledge to understand REST APIs, their architecture, and combining both of them, you have to develop a solution. So it's a little bit costly when compared to the other regular IT standards that we have. But yeah, affordability is purely based on the business that we are talking about, whether it's a small hospital, big hospital, how they want to go for. Solutions can be achieved based on what kind of solution they want to apply.
Okay, thank you.
One of the paradigm you mentioned, Dixon, was implementation or the V2 V3.
Mhm.
My question is, will this course
Mhm.
maybe include that aspect of the FHIR? So I know that you guys offer HL7, as a separate course.
Mhm. Mhm.
But then if we consider that HL7 standard
Mhm.
being available via FHIR, will this teach us how that can be possible with with the FHIR implementation? Because what I'm trying to sort of understand is, being part of a healthcare organization,
Mhm.
how I can you know talk more about FHIR,
Mhm.
uh, and basically replace or maybe add the FHIR component to the existing interfaces that we have.
Okay. So, I mean, to answer your first question, we have to, uh, so you are saying, do we have a scenario or anything as part of this course? We'll take a look at uh, how do we implement V2 or an appointments interface or an orders and results interface with FHIR.
Mm-hmm.
So, we cover the workflows. So workflows will tell you how we can really implement FHIR to replace these existing things that we have. So that will give you a fair idea of how it can be done.
Mm-hmm.
But practically, how we will go ahead and replace those things, we are not going to get that deeper because that involves a lot of programming knowledge and all. We can achieve that with Mirth integration engine, and you will get a fair idea of how you can replace your existing V2 versions with FHIR using Mirth as an integration solution. But that would account for 60 to 70% of what you're asking for. Uh, Other things you have to little bit explore more based on these two aspects of how do we implement workflows and how do we use an integration engine to convert your existing V2 into FHIR. These both has to be combined to see how we can achieve the solution that you are saying. But
Okay.
yeah, you will get a better idea, definitely a better idea of how you can achieve that.
Okay.
But
Cool.
practically in this training, that scope is not covered because that's a lot to cover within the base training of FHIR.
Okay. No worries.
That becomes a full-fledged project,
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Thank you.
And Dixon, this is Vikash again.
Yeah, Vikash.
Sorry, I joined a couple minutes late.
No worries.
So this is like 3 days training. I mean, what's the scope of this one, and what should be the next
No,
step?
this
And
is
what are the
6-week training, 6 to 7 week training. So I'm going
Oh,
to cover those aspects at the end of the training. When do we have? How many days we have? What is the course duration and all? I'll cover.
okay, and then other thing, I think you mentioned that for FHIR you need a lot of programming skills as well. How
No,
much
no.
programming is
So,
for the API, the REST
mhm.
API, and all JSON and XML and all kind of technologies? How much it requires if someone is not from the computer science background? How much he needs to know in order to come into the FHIR world?
Right. So there are multiple roles that you can perform as a FHIR resource. Okay. I mean, FHIR analyst. You can become a business analyst where you don't need any one of these knowledge in depth. For example, you don't need to know how to build a REST API. You don't need to know how to uh, convert V2 interfaces to FHIR and all. So if you are a business analyst, then you need to know the structure of FHIR resource. How do you create FHIR? How do you create a FHIR resource at least at a very high level? And how do you do mapping between V2 and FHIR resources? How do you map source data to V2 to FHIR resources? If you get a source database and you are asked to go ahead and create mapping sheets for that. If you are a developer, then you may be an integration developer or full-fledged API developer. So if you're an integration developer, then you need to have knowledge on JSON structure. You need to have knowledge on JavaScript at least, so that you can build your transformations to become a middleware integration engineer. If you are becoming a full-fledged developer, then you need to have thorough knowledge on how to develop APIs, how to take care of server-side implementations or client-side server-side developments or client-side developments. If you're developing a mobile app, you should know very well about how to develop a mobile app. If you are being part of a server development team, you should very well know how to create a server, how to interpret the data, how to perform validations. There is a lot that we have to do when we are talking about server-side developer. So it purely depends upon what kind of role you want to get into. This training covers basics of FHIR, which would help you to go into any one of these roles. Okay, business analyst, yes, you will be able to understand full-fledged how to become a business analyst through this course. Middleware integration developer, yes, because we were going to perform a lot of transformations using ADT, V2 or CSV to FHIR resources. So you can become a full-fledged middleware engineer through this training. Core developer, where you have to develop server-side implementations and client-side implementations, or client-side developments and server-side developments. That is something that we are not covering because that involves a lot of prerequisites like knowing Java or .NET
Right.
or JavaScript in depth. So we are not going to take that third side of core development aspects. But if you want to explore other basic stuff which is needed to become a core developer is covered in this, which you can explore later.
Okay. And for this training, do you have any kind of playground? Because I don't know, in my hospital environment, I don't have ability to, do any kind of experiment.
Yeah,
in this,
absolutely. We are going to we are going to install the required things in your personal laptops itself. We are going to use VS Code. We are going to use Cleanify. We are going to use FHIR. FHIR will be used as one of the servers that we are going to interact with. How do we exchange data? How do you create a repository? How do you create a patient record in a repository? How do you exchange the data? The searches that we are going to perform, all of these practical aspects we'll be doing with FHIR. So we are practically going to take a look at what all the topics I have taken you through.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep, no problem. So I know that we passed by the time, but because of a lot of questions that we had, we couldn't complete what we are going to take a look at. So we'll continue tomorrow. So tomorrow's session is also free of cost. You guys can go ahead and join and continue. But from third session, if you would like to continue, you need to enroll. Next question that comes into play is what is the duration of the course? Duration is going to be 6 weeks. because of the heavy course content that we have. We need to cover all the topics of FHIR, and every day it will be at 8 o'clock in the morning Indian time, which is I think 9:30 Eastern, and then we'll have it 5 days a week from Monday, so Tuesday morning to Saturday morning Indian time, Monday evening to Friday evening Eastern time. So whoever is in Eastern, please make a note of that, and you can join at that point of time. And all these sessions, if you are unable to attend, they will be uploaded to the drive, and you can go ahead and look at the recording. If you miss any one of those sessions, we do that. We upload that every day. Whatever material that we are going to cover, that will be uploaded to drive as well. You can go ahead and take a look at the material from there. And yeah, that is all. Any other questions that you guys have as of today?
Dixon,
We'll continue tomorrow anyway with what is a resource and all. But yeah, I don't want to waste your time.
Dixon, I got this detail from the LinkedIn. I don't know the fee and all those things, and
Yeah.
Are you gonna share that information as well? How much will the
Right.
fee?
Yes. So Srinivas has shared his information in the chat. So for administrative related aspects like what is the fee, the link, what is the WhatsApp group, what is the drive link and all will be managed by Srinivas. Srinivas's phone number is pasted in the chat. Let me paste that again.
Yeah, please.
So I have pasted that again. You guys can pick it up from there, and he's the primary point of contact for all the administrative stuff. As I said, fees and all. He will. You can talk to him.
Okay, thank you.
So Henok had a question. Will we have an example on how to integrate with lab machines? No. It is when you say lab machines, is it about? Can you talk, Henok?
Yes, I can talk.
Hey, yeah.
Can we integrate, like, can we have some integration methods where I can order laboratory from AMR and can receive result? So is this possible in this course?
No, we don't have EHR system, right? So we won't be able to place order and see the entire flow, but we will definitely able to see what happens when you place an order in EHR, and if you want to convert it to FHIR and then post it to another machine, or get the data from machine and convert it to an HL7 message. So that is something that we do cover.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions from anyone?
Thank you, Dixon.
Okay, great. I'm not hearing any more questions, so I think we'll conclude today's session here. We will continue tomorrow, taking a look at what is a resource, in what format do we exchange a resource, how do we, how resource is the basic unit. When we talk about FHIR, it's all about resources. You will hear this term maybe many more times all through the training. We'll be talking a lot about resource. So we'll understand what is a resource. We'll explore what is a resource at the base level, and then we will see how this propagates to all other entire architecture that we have for FHIR, and we'll take a deeper look at it. We'll start from there anyway. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. We'll catch up tomorrow morning at the same time and continue with the topics. Thanks everyone.
Thank
All have a good day.
Thanks, Mr. Dixon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Michael.